Welcome to Cultic Cube, where we cube religiously. We make you better at cube, and make your cube better. One of the exciting innovations in Modern Horizons 1 is the introduction of a cycle of forces, in the mold of Force of Will. The new counter magic, Force of Negation, has proven divisive in the cube community. Today I'll offer my opinion on the card, having had the opportunity to cube it for a time. In brief, Force of Negation is quite good. This is a corollary to my contention that Negate is excellent in most cubes. We will situate the new force in relation to its counter magic kindred, and I will ultimately argue that Force of Negation is better than Force of Will. Let us begin with a consideration of Force of Will. This is an iconic card, and an undeniably powerful one as a Fora of constructed formats, such as Legacy and Vintage, that care a great deal about what happens on turns 1 and 2. I do not mean to claim that the card is, by contrast, awful in cube. However, 5 mana for a counterspell is, in fact, such an inflated rate that one is typically priced into using the card's alternate casting cost. In this mode, one definitionally 2-for-1s oneself, which is not what any deck, least of all a control deck, hopes to do. Two of the most important axes along which Magic is fought are tempo and card advantage, and Force of Will shines when battles are fought principally over tempo. The deck that is invested in tempo wants to develop win cons more quickly than the opponent. It wants to apply pressure by developing efficiently while frustrating the opponent's development. When one hopes to decide the game while players still have cards in hand, then card advantage is not important. The deck that invests in card advantage obeys the maxim that the player who casts the greater number of spells tends to win games. This deck hopes to husband its resources in the early part of the game and look for opportunities to get multiple cards worth of value out of a single card. It wants to maintain a stable board state and push the game into its later stages. At this point, mana should no longer be such a bottleneck, and the deck can find additional cards. When the board is stable, the player who has superior card resources is likely to carry the day. I suggest that limited Magic tends to favor card advantage as the more important resource in general. While this is less true of Cube than of Retail Limited, it still holds up. Tempo-oriented strategies tend to suffer from the increased variability and decreased redundancy inherent in singleton formats, and in draft-based formats for that matter. Given that Force of Will's likeliest mode creates card disadvantage, it is not especially desirable in games of attrition. And of course, blue decks in Cube that run Permission tend, as a rule, to be more interested in card advantage than in tempo. Given that I do not love Force of Will in Cube, you might well wonder why I think Force of Negation is viable, when it is admittedly almost strictly worse in every sense. The major advantage that it has demonstrated thus far in my testing is that it is castable for its face value. I estimate that the card has been cast for 3 mana about 80% of the time. The alternate casting mode is just gravy that sometimes becomes spectacularly relevant. Of course, one might dispute the contention that Negate has value, or that one might be willing to pay 3 mana for the effect. Let us turn then to a defense of Negate. This is one of the best performing counters in my cube. There is certainly better Permission. I do not cube Mana Drain, which puts Negate to shame. Counterspell is certainly better, and Mana Leak might be as well, but I argue that Humble Negate is the next best counter. Negate is inexpensive, and not as color committal as it might be. The fact that the spell has a targeting restriction is undeniably a real drawback. Nevertheless, creatures are the easiest kind of permanent for control decks to interact with, often thanks to the assistance of other colors. Blue is, of course, the worst at dealing with creatures in a permanent fashion, but even here one has options. Non-creature permanents are more difficult to handle and can be quite scary. Included in this category are Planeswalkers, which are massive value engines, and which are becoming increasingly densely represented in cubes of late. And of course, Negate handily intervenes in instants and sorceries, which are, generally speaking, impossible for other colors to manage on the stack. I find that people tend to undervalue Negate. There are matches in which it might be bad, but most cube decks in most cube environments will play important cards that Negate will catch. Force of Negation asks that one pay cancel prices for a Negate. This is far from ideal, but I have found that this is not a deal breaker. The card's flexibility in casting makes up for the color pip tariff. It is also true that the card has timing restrictions on its alternate casting mode. This has not proven to be a huge liability. It is harder to use this card than Force of Will and Counter Wars that defend your own plays. Nevertheless, most of what Negate catches happens at sorcery speed anyway, and thus on the opponent's turn. Both blue forces are valuable for disrupting combo, but Force of Will is much better at providing insurance if you are the combo deck. Allow me to suggest that you give Force of Negation a try. If you are running Force of Will, I would swap the two and see what you think. If you are running Negate, you might swap those, though it might be better to run both. And even if I have not sold you on Force of Negation, I encourage you to stick a Negate in your environment and see how it plays. Check out my previous video on equipment that flies under the radar, or browse the channel to see what else might be of interest to you. Let's keep hanging out and chatting Cube.